If you've been injured in a car accident, make sure you speak to our good friend Adam Burbauer at the Burbauer Law Firm. Adam and his crew do things the right way and get great results. Adam is not only the man of the hour, the man with the legal power, too sweet to be sour, he is also the excellence of elocution. Check out Adam at burbauerlaw.com. Follow him on Facebook, and do not forget to tell him that Dan and Benny sent you.
Dan and Benny in the Ring is a podcast that everybody ought to listen to. As a matter of fact, I'm going to have Hotchkiss Featherbottom put it on my playlist because I don't know how to work that shit. But guys, in all seriousness, keep doing what you're doing. Keep plugging away. You can do it.
Hello, friends, and welcome to another edition of Dan and Benny in the Ring. I'm Dan Spaciano, joined as always by the player himself, Benny Scala. Benny, how you doing, buddy?
Dan, we're 10 days from the nut shot heard around the world, and of course, I'm referring to that rat bastard John Cena kicking Cody in the figs after Cena won the Elimination Chamber. I'm still in shock. Apparently, Kenny is too.
Got him right in the pistachios, baby.
Right in the plums.
I will say, you know, they always say you remember the little things about big moments. 10 years from now, 20 years from now, I think we're still going to be talking about how The Rock didn't quite know the motion for throat slashes. That is the first time in my life I've ever seen someone literally do ear to ear. I mean, and I'm not saying that as a criticism. I mean, you talk about like a dramatic effect. I thought that was great. And people are going to be like, oh, the throat slash, not the, get him, that perfect super villain cut. I loved it. Great.
It's like an elite feeling to it, like when you sip from a teacup and put the pinky up, I thought.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
So, yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it, guys.
Yeah, Benny, I know we already heard the voice and we already jumped to him before we get started, but why don't we tell everybody who's joining us this evening?
Yeah, Dan, we have had so many great authors on this show, and tonight I think we have one of the best. He's written books like Ken Patera, Way to the World, Tito Santana, Don't Call Me Chico, and Brutus Beefcake, Strutting and Cutting, and the one and only Kenny Casanova. Kenny, welcome to Dan and Benny in the Ring.
Thank you so much. And I'm working on Greg the Hammer Valentine, which kind of fits nicely with the other two that you just mentioned.
That should be a good one.
I'll kind of have the IC Championship, Tag Team Championship trio at my disposal when we're done.
One of the greatest.
Yeah. Yeah, Valentine is one of those ones that I don't want to say he falls through the cracks because people do remember him, but you tend to lose sight of just how important and consistent he was for so long. I once heard someone refer to him as Greg the Gas Tank, which you kind of lose sight of. I mean, I remember everything from his, obviously, like you said, the IC and the fights to his feud with Ronnie Garvin, which introduced a lot of WWF fans to Ronnie Garvin for what he was. Just absolute great stuff.
You remember that gimmick with the leg brace where they would spin it around to make the figure four extra painful?
Oh yeah,
I think that sold it to me as a kid. I was a super big mark for that idea. I thought it was cool.
It's funny. I think it was, I want to say it would have been end of 2023. The AEW aired a series of matches. It was a feud between FTR back when they were pretty much, they had every tag title across multiple companies. And they did a best 2 out of 3 falls match against Juice Robinson and, I'm drawing a blank now. Help me out, chat.
Was it another Bullet Club guy?
He's currently injured right now. That's why I'm not being able to. But
I can't think of it.
Jay White and Juice Robinson were the.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, I apologize. Juice Robinson's the one that's injured. But point is they aired the best 2 out of 3 falls match. Arguably, I would say that was not only match of the year, it was one of the best tag team. Benny will tell you, I'm a sucker for tag team wrestling. One of the best matches I've ever seen. Definite match of the year for that year. But one of the storylines that they were doing in that feud was Dak would roll the knee pad down so that the sharpshooter could get more pressure. And that was the first time I'd seen somebody even acknowledge like, oh, move my pads since Greg Valentine. I thought that was such a nice touch for fans like me.
Right. I mean, that shoots way back to like Iron Mike Sharp with the he had something on his arm there that he would hit people with. Cowboy Bob Orton had the cast, right? And
Iron Sheik in his boots. He used
Iron
to
Sheik in the boot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. In fact, I think that's what they talked about a little bit when they came up with the gimmick. They said, the Sheik has the loading of the boot. Maybe you could like do something and get the figure 4 and make it more powerful. And that's when they came up with that idea.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, great stuff. But jump right into it, Kenny. Again, thank you for your time. This should be an awesome conversation we have. We always start. So I always love starting the same question. Every answer is different, and we've had some great intro stories. So I want to start with the same question for you. When did the wrestling bug bite you as a fan? When do you remember becoming a fan? Who were your favorites growing up? Tell us about your intro into wrestling.
I mean, I want to say that I remember my grandmother watching it and my mom watching it a little bit as I was very young, and I didn't quite understand it, but I would get excited when they would get excited. But I do remember at a very young age, I would say 1978. I was 7. I was super young, but my dad brought me to a live show in Springfield, Mass area. So sort of near Boston. And it was Greg the Hammer Valentine versus Chief Jay Strongbow. And it was my little sister. She was 3 years younger than me. So she was like 5 or something like that. She's fallen asleep, which we always joke about. As a kid, you fall asleep during a live pro wrestling match. But the finish of that match had them go to the outside, and Chief Jay Strongbow had been put out similarly to Wahoo McDaniels when he got his leg broken by Greg Valentine. And they took out Chief Jay took out a ring of keys, big ring of keys, and just started drilling Greg the Hammer. There's blood everywhere. And I'm a little kid and I'm going, oh my God, I can't believe this. And my dad's trying to explain to me, well, normally the good guy doesn't do that. But in this case, the bad guy had gotten to him before we saw this all. And this is finally his revenge. And I'm starting to get, the storyline. And that's, I think, when I kind of figured it out that, it's like a comic book, So 7 or 8 years old I was.
That's awesome. It's funny you say that, Benny. How many guests through the years have said that they got into wrestling because of their grandmother? It's always mom and grandmom liked wrestling. It's crazy how that's happened.
That was a really good time to start liking wrestling, though, in the late 70s and in the Northeast. Perfect.
Sure. I mean, we only had a handful of channels, and we got New York, so we got WWF. And we also got a little world class. So I was watching Missing Link and, the Von Erichs and all of this early on. So I remember that just a tad before WWE, I think even. So pretty cool. I got it really early on.
That's awesome.
So Kenny, the other question we asked our author guests is, when did you decide that you wanted to make writing your vocation and, specifically professional wrestling?
So I'm all across the board. I'm like the king of side hustles. My official job started around 2000. I'm an English teacher. I teach 12th grade English. And with that comes teaching writing. So it also made sense for me to write a lot during the summer, right? So at the same time, I started as a professional wrestling manager 5 or 6 years before that. So I started as a manager in 95 or so, 94. And working with those guys eventually led to, hey, maybe I could write a book for you. And that started with Kamala, with my first book that came out around 2014 when he lost both legs to diabetes. And I said, hey, why don't we try to get a Kickstarter together and help you? Because, a lot of the guys, they don't have any sort of insurance or anything like that. Right. They're pretty much on their own, especially after they're gone, because they're considered like, a contract, a subcontractor or what have you.
Yeah, independent contractor, right?
Yeah. So, but it only made sense. But just before that, I was writing a sci-fi book that I was happy to put out, and then I sidelined that, jumped over to Kamala, and then it just kind of fell into order. I got Kamala, and then Danny Davis, and Bruce Beefcake, then Sabu and Vader, Tito. This goes on and on. Just Incredible, ODB, Ken Patera. So I got a bunch of them.
Yeah, that was relatively a new thing, though, wasn't it? Writing books about wrestlers when you first started.
Sure. I mean, back then, really, you're looking at mostly the WWE press stuff, like, Mick Foley, which is a super cool background. He had a ghostwriter he didn't like, and then he fired him and he did it himself, writing on tons and tons of legal pads. And I think another big one that influenced me would have been Roddy Piper's book was super cool. That was a little bit more on its own, but Jerry the King Lawler was a WWE book. But then there was books like The Rock's book that sucked. And then there was a lot of other little ones that are just like the first Tito Santana book was cool at its time, but it was kayfabe. So like he would say, I tried my hardest to fight the best I could that night, but in the end, I still came up short. So it was kind of still in character,
Right.
So when I started, that's around when shoot interviews are still happening, and then people are selling the DVDs and stuff like that. And the books started to become the shoot interviews in, deep dive form. So
good stuff.
That's awesome. I was like I like the mix, and I'm glad you said what you did about The Rock. I remember reading that book when I was in
it wasn't good, right?
I guess high school, college era, because late 90s, early 2000s that book came out. And I remember thinking, especially after as good as Mick Foley's was, I remember thinking it was terrible.
Right. And I mean, we might be a little spoiled now because when you look back at it, you're like, this isn't so great. But now you look back and you're like, oh, it really wasn't good because there's so much other, good ones out there now.
Yeah.
So, right.
I better be too careful though. Criticize The Rock too much. He'll get Benny to turn heel on me. Yeah.
You definitely don't want Travis Scott like poking you in the eardrum or whatever.
Oh, yeah, right.
No, Dan, you pay me way too well. I'm totally loyal to you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what happened, because Benny doesn't like to tell anybody. He's got the Shohei Ohtani contract. 99% of his money's deferred.
That'll never see, but
well, yeah, it's funny. Like Benny said, unlike many of the authors we've interviewed, you have a body of work within the professional wrestling industry. You've done ring announcing. I believe, WWE, you've worked for various promotions around the world as a manager. Kind of share some of those experiences, maybe tell a good story or two. Let people know Kenny Casanova, the wrestler.
Jesus, crazy. So I started in 94 training. I was working at a comic book store at the time, and one of the guys there said, hey, I'm going to go to a wrestling school. And I said, oh, I'm coming with you then. So I went with him, and I learned how to wrestle and the whole deal. Guys came through there to kind of help teach back then. We had regular trainers, a guy named TC Reynolds was a regular guy, another guy, Preston Steele. But Tom Brandy was in there a lot, who some people might remember. But then anybody who was on a show that weekend, so the way it would work is I'd go in on a Friday, we would do a couple lessons at night, then there'd be a kind of like a Saturday show. Whoever the name was on that show would also come by and kind of do like a little bit of a seminar or whatever you want to call that. They didn't call it seminar back then, but we had guys like Bam Bam Bigelow come through there. King Kong Bundy I worked with a ton. King Kalua was a big name still wrestling who taught from Super Light Snuka was in there a bunch. He was taught from Snuka, I believe, some, and Don Morocco. All kinds of guys came through. So I got all kinds of like little tidbits, and learned these Memphis spots. And I really like the old school stuff, doing the brass knuckles, which are just starting to bring back the old stuff and make it new again, which I'm happy about. You see some of the old stuff starting to come back. So I'm on the road, singing goofy songs. We would make signs and hold them up, telling girls to flash us in the cars next to us to entertain ourselves. Or if we did that, they'd write the license and we'd get arrested. We had all kinds of crazy stuff, antics going on all the time. I don't know, man, I took like all these finishers because back then what was happening is the older guys were starting to leave television and the younger guys were starting to come up to get to television. So I was right in the middle of the ground, and a lot of times the older guys would want the manager to take the heat. So I took a DDT from Jake, an avalanche from Bundy, a power bomb from Sid, Cobra Clutch from Sergeant Slaughter. So like I've got all of these like accolades of being jobbed out by names. Yeah. I mean, and the manager, is not really supposed to get a lot of that, but I took the wrestling lessons so I could take the bumps good and stuff, because the best managers were like Bobby Heenan, right? He would fall out of the ring and do a crazy flipper or something like that, and that's what I tried to emulate. And somewhere along the line, I got a kimchi costume, and I started doing some Northeast appearances with Kamala as kimchi just because I had the costume and it was a good costume, and that's what led to the book writing stuff, because we had a little bit of a history in the past. So I mean, I also ring announced for WWE and guest spots a couple times for Owen Hart versus Phil Apollo and Ahmed Johnson. They would bring in a guy, and sometimes it would be an audience member, and sometimes it would be somebody they knew. I kind of knew a ring announcer named Bill Dunn at the time, who was the guy right after Finkel. Bill Dunn was also the merchandise guy, and he brought me in a couple times to just do a guest spot and be silly on the mic and pretend to be a fan and announce. But I was also doing the indie stuff at the time. So I've been all around up and down the Northeast quite a bit, and middle states and some in Canada. Somewhat regional, I had different appearances on different shows and stuff like that. A little bit of in on an ECW show here and there and things like that. But never really made it to WWE much more than those guest spots.
Kenny, what was your gimmick as a manager? Were you Kenny Casanova?
Yep, it was Kenny Casanova. Kept the name all the time. It was sort of like a lounge singer kind of gimmick, a little bit of Jimmy Hart in there. Kind of like a geeky lounge singer who thinks
like
all the women love him.
Tony Clifton from
yeah, very much like that. Yep, and that kind of spawned off of a funny thing. Started off with just dressing like a lounge singer, but we went out to karaoke one night, and I could do sort of impressions of different singers while we were doing karaoke. And they're like, dude, you should do that like somehow with the wrestling. So I started singing my guys to the ring with the worst songs I could come up with to get heat, like Britney Spears and Tom Jones, just real bad stuff, right? And they loved it. Sal Sincere loved it. Like, he thought it was great. Tom Brandy. So eventually, this leads me to a whole nother career path. Because one thing leads to another kind of, and I'm doing that karaoke stuff, and people started to say, hey, could you do a karaoke party for me? And I'm like, geez, I'm not a DJ, but I figured it out. And I got the sound guy. Sound guy came for, used to do the entrance music for shows. He did some stuff with me for a bit. Then we took on a bar gig, and then he left. And then it just became me, and I became an actual wedding DJ, which I made even far more than the wrestling. So it started to pull me away from the wrestling a little bit. Because on Saturdays, that's when these weddings are, where I'm making like, $1,500, where as an independent manager, you might only make $100 if you're lucky sometimes, or you get a hot dog and a handshake, So anyhow, when I was torn between doing independent shows for not a whole lot of money and making a lot of money for these wedding events and DJ events and things and karaoke shows and stuff like that, that's when the writing made even more sense, because I could write during the week and then still do DJ events during the weekend, but still be connected to wrestling.
Was that before you were a teacher, Kenny?
Yes, but that bled into after. So I continued to do all of that stuff. I started teaching around 2000. One of your questions, I think you said as a pre-question there, was Fulbright. So, I don't want to jump too far ahead of where you are with me, but I did do pretty well teaching. Kids loved me because I acted goofy and did silly stuff. And, maybe if I would read to them, I used to teach alternative ed, which were kind of the kids that didn't do well in a traditional setting. I might read some books to them and help them pass the regents. I would do all the voices.
The regents. Oh man. Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I would read the book in different voices. So I would read all the different characters and give them a different voice. Like of Mice and Men, I would do like a line from that might be, I like ketchup on my beans, George. I would do these cartoony voices, and then they'd, think it's funny. And that eventually led to the school saying I should apply for a Fulbright. And I did. And then I got it. And I went to Japan for 6 weeks as an educational ambassador from New York. They spent something like $150,000 on me to go over there. And
wow.
I got to see sumo wrestling live, and they let me go in the locker room because I was connected to wrestling, and I met a bunch of the sumo wrestlers, and it was quite an experience. I lucked out there too. So
now, did your kids know about the fact that you were in wrestling?
Yeah, you know, I try to hide that a little bit, and I still try to do it. That's why, you know, if I come right out and say, hey, I've worked with this guy and this guy, I usually would wait till the end of the year and then just kind of leak it a little bit, show a picture of me with Hulk Hogan or Ric Flair or someone, and they, oh my God, you know. But, you know, you got to kind of, from an educational standpoint, you need to have their respect in the beginning of the year. So you're wearing the tie, you're mean until like Christmas, and then you start to lighten up a little bit.
Ease off a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. That's kind of the move.
Nice. So Dan and I have done a little bit of writing. I think I have 34 published stories with the Pro Wrestling Stories website. Dan has a few. And so we do have an appreciation for writing. But, you know, writing a short story is one thing. And you've written, you know, these long books. What is the discipline required? I mean, it's got to be a little bit different than writing a, 2,000 or 3,000 word short story. How do you approach that when you decide to write a new book?
So somehow I've become a teacher to wrestling writers, if that makes sense lately.
Oh, yeah.
A guy that writes for you now, Evan Ginsberg, just put out a book. Yeah, he just put out a book called Wrestling Rings, Blackboards, and Movie Sets. And I actually helped him format the book and all, and he had that in the works for a while. But also Sheldon Goldberg, who's a promoter, he recently put a book out. He's got his third book just about to come out. I'm going to also format the book for him. Nice guy. Yeah. His are fictional books with an independent wrestling kind of thing, kind of like the movie The Wrestler too, which Evan Ginsberg is coincidentally related to. He's the producer, executive producer or something like that, a producer of it. And anyhow, my advice to different people, especially for the wrestling, has always been to, first off, for writing, you have to schedule it. If you're going to write a long piece, you have to say that I'm going to put it on my calendar, and Monday night from 4 to 6, I'm going to give 2 hours to it, whatever you want to give. But you schedule it so that if you can't do it then, you can fall back and maybe do it on Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday and still make it happen. But if you don't have an organizational piece telling you to do so, it's easy for stuff to fall between the cracks. So my first tidbit has always been to schedule it, set time aside on a regular basis, especially when I'm interviewing someone, I'm doing a biography, an autobiography piece, because then that person knows the interview's coming, and we can reschedule it if they can't do it. But if we don't have it really set, a couple weeks might go by and nothing can happen. Maybe I didn't mention I did Vader's book. Vader's a good example of that. Vader would push stuff off a lot. He's about when I learned that I needed to do this organizational piece of a schedule every week on the calendar. His took 4 years to write. It took a long time. And poor guy, I mean, during that process, he got his death sentence, for lack of a better word. He got congenitive heart failure diagnosis. And they told me I had 2 years to live. So then we had to go back. We were almost finished. And we went back and we wanted to clean certain things up because he's a smart guy. He didn't want to put and he wasn't in the Hall of Fame. That was a super huge thing for him. He wanted to be in the Hall of Fame. He is now. But shame on WWE for waiting posthumously to put him in. They do that to a lot of people. I don't know why. He really wanted in. They didn't let him in. But we went back and we cleaned up different things. So if he said, Paul Orndorff was a prick, then we changed it to, I understand where he was coming from when he kicked me in the flip-flops because maybe I did this to deserve, or whatever. But that's what we did. We cleaned it up and then it finally came out. But he would go, as he said, dark for 2 or 3 months sometimes. He wouldn't answer the phone and I would get worried, and say, hey, are we still on this? Are we still doing this project? You're ignoring my text messages. And one day he calls me, he's like, Kenny, don't worry if I go dark for even 3 or 4 months. Sometimes I don't even talk to my son for 2 or 3 months. I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. I was like, there's certain things the wrestlers just kind of get sick of interviews. They're especially at this now. Maybe you guys know from podcasting that they're more and more becoming more difficult to book for.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Because they've done so many of them there now. It's out of their mind. They're like, I don't want to tell the same story anymore.
Right.
It's probably the same as the Beatles playing Twist and Shout a million times and then saying I'm done with this song and they don't want to play it live anymore. Why I picked the Beatles, I don't know. It's super over.
But now, Kenny, I heard something that is like very hard to believe. I heard that you've actually, on a couple of occasions, you've done 2 books at once.
Yeah, that was
that's amazing.
Sabu and Vader, and also Danny Davis and Bruce Beefcake came
How do you
like
do that?
Well, it's because of these guys going dark in you. So then I bounce back over to another project and work on that. So the Vader thing was especially that because that went on for 4 years. So I started Vader, then he would step aside a little, and then I do some Sabu, and then Sabu finished, and then I continued with Vader, and then they finished at the same time. I said, "Watch this! I'm going to drop 2 books at the same time," and it blew everyone's mind. This guy Kevin Gill was like, "Dude, Kenny Casanova, he put out 2 books at the same," and he was like marked out to that on a podcast. And I heard it. Someone sent me the clip, so I sent him the 2 books. But
wow,
that's awesome.
Yeah. So another, I guess we're still on the idea of how do you write a 450, 500 page book.
Yeah.
For you guys who are writers, and I don't know if this helps you, and I don't like to tell people how to write, but if you're doing that, it's best to try to figure out a table of contents first, and then make a different file for each individual chapter. So as you're getting the information, it never comes in clean. You never get it all from this one part. Especially when you're interviewing these guys, because their minds come all over the place and get little stuff from everywhere. So then I can jump from chapter 2 to chapter 8 and jump up to, with like for Greg the Hammer, I might start him training at Stu Hart and then jump up to Andre the Giant stepping on his throat in 1989 because he tells me a story, and then jump back to Mid-Atlantic in 1975 when he's tagging with Ric Flair. And then he turns on Ric Flair and hits him with a cane and breaks his nose. And then he tells me another story with Rugged Ronnie Garvin. So you see, it's all over the place. If you have all those different chapters and open a file, like I don't know if you use Google Docs or if you use Microsoft Word,
right?
Chapter 1, Mid-Atlantic, chapter 13, 1989. Then when you're getting this stuff, you can put the little stuff all over the place. And then it eventually starts to fill out all over the place instead of one massive document where you have to jump on all the time. So that's how I do the organizational piece to that. And you have to constantly rename the numbers of the chapters because you find there's a new chapter I didn't think of here, and you have to reshuffle and move them over to another folder and rename everything. And but it eventually works out for me that well. And the last tidbit of advice that I would probably give for writers, since we're on that, is voice is everything, right? So while I'm interviewing the guy, I try to pick up different things they say, the way that they say it, and retell the story using that stuff. And also use a ton of dialogue because wrestling fans, we love the promos. And we already know who, what Steve Austin sounds like. He's talking like this, bottom line, So if I use a lot of dialogue to tell the story and try to get them to reinvent what a conversation may have sounded like, it's already built into the wrestling guy's voice and it brings it more to life. So I use a ton of dialogue in my storytelling whenever I can. Even if it's not exact, I may say, can you recreate what maybe the conversation might have sounded like? And that's how I put it together. I just feel like when you're reading a book and it's a lot of results driven numbers and dates and places, that kind of puts you to sleep. So I try to brighten things up with a lot of dialogue and a lot of description when I can. Does that help?
No, that's and that makes sense. Like I've obviously never written a book, but I think back to the having a master's degree and some of the stuff I've done for university. I mean, my master's thesis was basically a small book, and if I hadn't have done an outline and a structure, I would have been lost halfway through, which I can respect that. But I'm curious because you were talking books. We've had 2 of the subjects of your books as guests on the podcast. Ken Patera was the special guest on our 100th episode. Tito Santana was our guest on episode 200. So both, anniversaries, 2 That's of great. Our best episodes. Tito's was phenomenal. Obviously, Ken Patera was, I believe, probably to our longest episode to date. He had some good stories.
You get him going, he'll keep going.
Oh yeah, Benny and I, we've both read, Don't Call Me Chico. I know Benny has Weighted the World on Audible. So many autobiographies sound and I mean this as a compliment, sound nothing like the subject, yet managed to nail both of them, especially Patera's sense of humor. Having spoken with him at length, you that really comes through in the book. Like you said, get him going. You hear the fun, you hear the stories, like you were talking about with the with telling the voice. I was kind of hoping you could expand on that. Like you said, the key is to capture the voice in an autobiography. Just really, it kind of explain to our listeners just how important that is.
Yeah, so I'll give you an example of this. When I was doing Sabu's book, I wrote somewhere in the first draft, I'm still putting it all together, you know. I had some trepidation that night. And Sabu read it and he's like, Kenny, I don't even know what the fuck trepidation means. It was like, oh, wait a second. You know, that I need to use all words that only Sabu would say.
Sabu language, yeah.
Right. So now there's a whole process that I do is after I get the story down on paper, then I reread it. And then I say, how would Sabu say this? Is this a Sabu vocab word? No, it's not. And I would have to get it out. And sometimes I'll leave in some stuff because I think it's also a little shocking and fun to throw in a word maybe they wouldn't say. So I do that sometimes for fun to lighten up stuff. An example of that, I might have had Earl Hebner say nutsack or something silly. Like you were like, what? You know, like instead of, you know, testicles or something. I might throw a funny word in there that might not have been them. But when I was doing Earl Hebner's book, by the way, which I don't think I mentioned even that I've done, but
no, I don't think you did.
Yeah, his daughter told me, you know what he does a lot? He always makes these funny analogies up with like, you're so broke that you don't have a pot to piss in or porch to throw it under, things like that. So I went through and I read up on different analogies that people would say down south that were ridiculous. And then I do a control find on my computer, hot. Okay. It's so hot that it felt like I was in the devil's asshole or something. You know what I mean? Like I find a weird one and I would pull out the word hot and then drop that in because it sounded like how he would talk, even though he didn't say it. It was something someone from his area might say, you know. And like with Greg Valentine, you know, you become like comedians are very observational. When Greg Valentine tells a story, he sometimes drops into, you know, and he says, you know, you're going down the road and first you see this and then you start going and you see this and then you do that. He drops in, like, I think that's called second person. He starts speaking in second person. So that's a little mannerism I noticed he did. So I'll put it in here and there after I've told the story. So it's not necessarily his words verbatim as he spoke and I'm typing them, but I'll get the story, put the story in, and then I tweak the story to sound like him. Is that boring? It's sort of boring, but maybe it helps if you have a writing off.
No,
not at all.
That's really funny. I was listening to Weight of the World this morning, and it was when Kenny was telling the story when him and Pete Doherty, the Duke of Dorchester.
Oh my God!
They hooked up with these two young ladies, and it like just listening to it and having Kenny on the show, it sounded just like, you know, he told a story when he was on the show when he hooked up with Vern Gagne's niece. And he had a cast from his balls to his ankles. But I got the job done.
Yeah. You know, got the job done. Yeah, right. It's kind of like this, you know. And I think probably
exactly.
getting that what is it, like an impersonation? Once you get that impersonation, I can kind of you know, get it on paper a little bit better. Maybe some people just can't do that. Maybe it's a little gift.
Right.
I don't know.
But you know, listening to the book on Audible, I'm thinking, holy shit, this guy nailed it. This is definitely Ken Patera.
Let's talk about technology for a second that you're doing Audible. All right. So ideally, the best thing to do would be have the wrestlers read the books. It's not always possible, though, because a 10-hour book might take 20 hours in a recording studio or more to get that quality because they might fumble and they got to start over and then start over and start over. So Audible randomly 2 years ago or less said, hey, we're going to do AI books. And a lot of people don't like it that much, but they're so good that I can go in and speed up or slow down a voice that they give me. And I can change the pronunciation. So you might be listening to a draft and it might have said AWA instead of AWA on Ken Patera. And I had to go manually in and say, no, don't say AWA, say AWA, and make the computer say the right thing all over the place.
Oh, interesting.
So it may cost an author thousands of dollars to get a voice actor to do a book. Tito Santana's has a voice actor that did it, couple grand to get them to read the whole thing and produce 10 hours or something like that of a book. But AI is free, and Audible just takes your Kindle, which is your ebook version, and they have it read by a computer voice that you select that you think is close, and you have to tweak stuff to make it sound right. So,
Okay.
Yeah. I find that stuff fascinating. Hopefully your nerdy listeners might like that too.
I know I do.
Well, speaking of the listeners, Foxhole Willie, a regular in our chat channel, says Kenny comes across as a very interesting fellow and wants to know if there's any plans to write your own autobiography.
Everybody asks that. I don't know. Would you buy it? Maybe, but my thing has always been very formulaic in the way I select authors. So, I mean, topics. So they have to have held some kind of championship or had something to do with headlining shows or been on mainstream TV, you know, in some way. Because basically when somebody's buying the book, they relate to a topic. That's why nonfiction sells very well. My sci-fi book doesn't sell well at all because I'm not known as a sci-fi writer and I have to build an audience. So like if somebody buys a Stephen King book, the topic isn't really horror, it's Stephen King because they're buying all of Stephen King's stuff, though he sticks in horror, but writes other stuff too, sci-fi and things like that. If I were to put out Kenny Casanova, I don't know that I'm big enough yet to actually command someone to want to read it. So I turned myself down. It's same as I would turn down other wrestlers maybe that might have a great story to tell, but I don't feel like enough people would read it. Because then the bottom line is everybody has a podcast. Not every podcast is listened to. Same thing with books. Everybody could have a book, but will everybody read it? I don't want to write a book that nobody reads. I don't mind giving a free book away, because then somebody gets to read it and then they appreciate my art, you know, that I'm putting out there.
Sure.
But as far as the topic, I want it to be something that people have an interest in. And I don't think that me personally, maybe a pro wrestling story would be good. Like on your site, we could do a write-up or something there. You know, maybe I could see 20 pages on me maybe, but not so sure somebody would want to invest 12 hours into listening to me sing and talk about my karaoke and how I like to, you know, pronunciate things on audible.com. So, but
be a hell of a fun guy to hang out with, though.
Yeah, right. I hope so.
But Kenny, now totally off topic, but you have become to me the resident social media. It's an obituarist. I thought it was an obituarian, but it's an obituarist. So whenever I see a post on a celebrity's death from somebody else, very first thing I do is I go in the search Kenny Casanova, and if I see that, you know, Carl Lipbaum has died, then I know it's authentic. So how did that come about?
I'm getting a lot of feedback. Is that on me? I'm not sure if that's me or not. Oh, no, it's not. It's not me. I thought maybe I could barely hear a television or something in the distance, but it's not me. I'm sorry. I thought it was me. I'm sorry, guys. Yeah, so the question, all right, so this is a ridiculous story. So get ready. Hold on for this one. That's all a huge inside joke. So what Benny just said was, why do you always have these posts that say Pee Wee Herman has died? Some celebrity has died, right?
It's always so-and-so has died.
Yes.
Period.
Okay. So 25 years ago, I got Jeff Jarrett's number and I started crank phone calling him on the way home from wrestling shows. And originally they were Ron Simmons calling him. So it would be like, damn, dog, did you hear that? Who's somebody who died back then? Damn, dog, did you hear that Umaga died? Damn. You know, and I would just do stuff like that. But eventually I changed that. So it was no longer Ron Simmons and it became someone called the Ghost of Professional Wrestling that was crank phone calling him. and that was Dr. Claw from Inspector Gadget. You ever watch that, Inspector Gadget?
Long time ago.
Yeah, so I would call up and go, "This is the ghost of professional wrestling. Umaga has died." And then I would make a very off-the-wall, horrible, real bad off-color joke, something disgusting. And I would hang up and I would leave that on his voicemail. I did that for probably 10, 15 years. And I never met the man. I never really worked. Actually, I worked with him backstage somewhere, but I never really talked to him much at all other than hi. So he was at a convention somewhere, and I got $20. And I said, I'm going to go over. I'm going to wait in line. I'm going to meet Jeff Jarrett. So I got in line, and this is the only guy I've ever paid for like a picture and waited in line. Because I got a good collection, by the way. And a lot of these guys I work with, I get all kinds of cool stuff. But I waited in line. And when I got up to the front, he's like, "Okay, so how do you want me to make it out?" And I said, "Make it out to the ghost of professional wrestling." He's like, "Is that you? You son of a bitch." Because I had crank phone called him for 15 years. I got a picture of me and him together after that. And so I started text messaging him all of these. And then that became Facebook posts. And people who knew that story knew that this was all just like a big inside joke on me ribbing this guy for so many years and torturing him with these brutal dad jokes about somebody dying.
So that's he didn't know it was you.
He had no idea really who it was. He had the phone number.
That's great.
And then eventually after that, I told him I'm a wrestling manager in the Northeast. We've worked a little bit together. We've done some shows where I was Kamala's Kimchi, but you probably still don't know. But I'm also an author. I've done these books. So I'm trying to romance him now into letting me write his book, So I see something funny. There was a news story a week ago where somebody up here in Schenectady hit somebody with a guitar over the head and put him in the hospital, and he was arrested. So I send him that clip and I say, "Hey, gimmick infringement." And he laughs, So we have like a text kind of thing going on now, But basically, that was a means. These crank phone calls were a means to keep me and the wrestlers awake when we're driving, a 3 or 4 hour trip to a wrestling show in the middle of the night. Let's call Jeff Jarrett, mess with him, And I did it to Ricky Morton. I did it to JBL. I did it to all kinds of different people. But Jeff Jarrett was the one that really persevered and turned into that Facebook post that you see all the time. This is an inside joke. But now it's outside.
But now you are the source because you are the one that I turn to. Like, this can't be right. Let me check Kenny's Facebook page. Oh, yeah.
You know how that happens, though, is I've done it so long where I announce whoever died that people know. So the moment someone dies, they send it to me. So I've got all these minions of celebrity deaths that, used to be just wrestler deaths, but now it's everybody.
Right.
And they say, "Ken, this guy died." And I quick posted it right away. And they're like, "How does he do this?" It's because I have thousands of followers that are shooting me nonsense. This guy died. So
you're on him pretty quick. I got to say that.
Yeah, it's because of the leads, really. So, but I check them though. I check first.
Yeah.
If I get one a little wrong, I quick try to delete it. I try not to do it though. I've done that happened recently. There was a wrestler who passed, but Black Bart, or did he pass yet? I don't know. Somebody thought he was dead and we put it up and then he wasn't quite dead. They said he had left the hospital or he made peace or something like that with leaving the hospital. And I thought it meant he died.
He did pass away, didn't he?
I think he has since then.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So, but guy named Vin Barry did his book pretty good. I also coached him a little with writing, and turns out I end up being a format guy. They email me their manuscripts and I kind of lay them out in a book, put them in a template, put pictures in them, give them a table of contents, and give it back to them and show them how to print on Amazon and make money for themselves rather than to try to have a third party publisher keep the ownership of the of whatever they wrote and then just give them royalties. They make more that way.
Right.
So.
I like it. Well, in addition to your wrestling books, you've also authored some bedtime stories. You mentioned the science fiction stuff, and you have a couple of comic book coloring books with humorous titles I'd love to hear about, especially I mean, obviously I want to talk about Cactus Jack and the Beanstalk, and I want to talk about
all right.
I want to talk about Demolition on the Moon. So how did those come about?
Sure. Okay, so I was next to a guy named Pete Bregman at a comic book convention. And this is the guy who writes the little comic strips for Bazooka Joe, the gum.
Oh, wow.
So, and he's next to me, and he's like showing me, look at this, I drew these little pictures of wrestlers, and he was making an app for somebody where they were like emoticons of wrestlers. And I said, we should try to put together a comic book or a coloring book or something, because his stuff looked very cartoony. And we just started talking. I'm like, well, instead of bedtime stories, why don't we call it bled time stories, like blood bleeding?
Oh,
and
nice.
we got to laughing. And I said, and I was doing a bunch of stand-up comedy acts with Hacksaw Jim Duggan, who kind of borrowed the platform of Cactus Jack, and he was going around and doing stand-up comedy at little Comic Works and Funny Bones and stuff like that. And I said to Hacksaw, hey, do you want us to make a coloring book? I got an awesome artist, and I'll write up the story. And he goes, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Let's do it. And I wanted to make it a little bit adult, not too crazy adult, but enough that like it would be shocking. So when you're looking at a coloring book, which is typically for kids, for kids to look at, it would have like, a joke of accidentally Jim Duggan milks a bull instead of a cow, and he's so G-rated that once I had finished it and made it kind of PG-13, he looked at it and said, oh, Kenny, it's funny, but man, I can't do it. And I was like, damn, we wrote the whole thing. I got it all done. It was going to be Hack in the Beanstalk. That's what it was originally. And I'm like, shit, man. We sat and I wasted this artist's time and all of this. And in the middle of the night, when I do a lot of my best work, 2 a.m, I was laying there. I'm like, Cactus Jack and the Beanstalk. I should have done Cactus Jack. Now, Cactus Jack had done the forward for my Kamala book, and he had given me some different information. Like I did ODB's book from TNA, and he was the one who pitched it to me. He's like, Kenny, can you do ODB's book? She's a good friend of mine who recently had a problem with her food truck. She burned her truck and needs some money. So I did her book. So I said, hey, man, can we do a coloring book for you and call it Cactus Jack and the Beanstalk? He's like, yeah. And we started, and I emailed him, and he texted me right back in the middle of the night. And he thought it was funny as hell, Cactus Jack and the Beanstalk. And then we just tweaked a little bit of the writing. And my artist, with technology being as it is these days, he was able to erase Hacksaw and put in Cactus Jack. And we changed just some of the characters and some of the things. So instead of Hacksaw fighting Andre at the end, it was Cactus Jack fighting Vader at the end as the big giant, if you know Jack and the Beanstalk story. And then we worked in Patterson and Briscoe. Patterson and Briscoe were in it, like some of his little characters on the side. And then and he got a writing credit, and we put it out, and it did pretty good. They're good for these convention appearances, that a lot of the old time guys are going to now these days to find a whole second career in these conventions. So they sign these coloring books, and it's funny. They're kind of an adult, humorous, but not too bad. But there's blood in them, so a little kid wouldn't have blood in a comic book.
Right.
So I did the same thing for Demolition on Mars, and then we did Snafu and the 3 versus the 3 Little Pigs. So yeah, they're good fun. Good merchandise for comic book conventions.
Yeah.
Well, Kenny, I say that you should always toot your own horn, but it's always better if you can get a hooker to do it for you. But neither one of those tonight. But I did want to tell our listeners that in 2010, you were inducted into the New England Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame. And then in 2024, and I didn't even know this existed, but the Pro Wrestling Author Hall of Fame. And those got to be quite humbling experiences.
Yeah, super cool to get some kind of accolades for writing. That was the first one, and I believe Ian Douglas and a few other writers sat and put that together. And there's to qualify for it, you have to have X amount of works with X amount of pages too. So it has to be like big works to be considered.
All right.
Yeah, so that's super prestigious for me. I appreciate being put into that, because I still don't feel like my writing is the best it could be. It's getting better. Like if you read my original stuff, some of the stuff I didn't have a great editor or whatever, but now I've figured out how to make everything work, and my stuff's gotten better over the years. And I feel like I can be even better with each one. Like this Greg Valentine is going to be really good. I think it's much more in depth. A lot of cinematic scenes where it feels like a novel more than an autobiography. Yeah, but the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame thing is a first big Hall of Fame in the Northeast. Joe Bruin kind of puts that together. And he put me in very early on with a class. I got in with Larry Zbyszko, Superfly Snuka.
Wow.
Yeah, I was in with some pretty decent names. He liked to put in like a regional guy with a couple old timers, and I got in there super early. So that said something for how much they appreciated my manager work.
Very nice.
I like it. It's funny. Yeah, how everything kind of, I say, comes full circle, but how the stories all kind of overlap,
kind of blend, right? Yeah,
exactly, to the logical conclusion. So as we wrap up, I want to kind of wrap up the best we can. You've talked about your books, you've talked about your pro wrestling. We got to do this self-promotion time. Where can everyone find your stuff? Where can we find your videos? Where can we find your books? I know I bought mine on Amazon. And then also, what other projects do you have coming up? What can we expect in the future from Kenny Casanova?
Okay, so for my book site, check out wohw.com. I've always been a big advocate of technology. I have a 4-letter domain, which they say is, pretty cool because I jumped on stuff early on. I also have kennycasanova.com where you can find out all kinds of stuff that I do there. With my wedding DJ stuff, I still do that. Got a wedding coming up in 2 weeks. Next week, I'm doing a baseball day for Dick's Sporting Goods. So I'm still out there DJing a bunch. KennyCasanova.com will show you my wrestling, my DJ stuff, and my writing stuff. WOHW.com is the book site. If you check out the DJservice.com, that's also my DJ site. All the platforms of Kenny Casanova. Early on, I made sure to get Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and everything. So Kenny Casanova, you look it up, that's me. And what do I got coming up? I started just for a brief second Rikishi's book, and he kind of put it on hold when Afa passed away, and there were some deaths in his family recently. So the book didn't happen, and then I jumped back to Greg Valentine's, which I had started a while ago, and then we started back up again. So I might jump back to Rikishi when I finish Greg Valentine's. I think Greg Valentine's will probably be out April, May. It's done. I just finished the first draft, and I'm putting the edits on it now. After that, I've been approved by Matt Hardy, and that could happen, but he decided to also kind of put that on hold a bit because he's been running around a lot. So that hasn't happened either yet, but I made it past. This is a very tough task. I made it past Rebby Sky. She approved me to write the book, which I hear that's a tough sell.
So I can't help but make the punchline. So you're saying your contract with Matt Hardy was deleted?
I wouldn't say it's deleted, but it's sort of on hold, but it feels kind of deleted right now because we haven't talked in about a year. So I don't know. Might be deleted, but I'll try to turn it off.
You got plenty to keep you busy until then, though.
Yeah.
And because I have a good dozen or so of them, out.
Well, I mean,
I usually can touch on somebody and they'll scoop me up if I want,
There you go. I mean, well, you figure he's assuming I haven't missed a title change. Him and Jeff are currently the TNA tag team champions. So, right. Maybe he's just waiting to add more chapters to the end of the career before they tells the story.
Yeah. So because if we put out the book now and he's got a few more chapters coming, I mean, that would kind of render the book obsolete. It would,
right.
You wouldn't have a good finish. So, yeah, I tried to work some Hardy stuff in there. I don't know but you see my Royal Rumble pinball machine back there? Look at that.
I love that.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's excellent.
Just realized that's kind of in there.
No, I love that.
Yeah, so that's what I got going on right now. Definitely check me out on Facebook. I also have WHW Publishers Facebook page where I post lots of old school clips and things that I find funny and shocking and throw it up there, and people get a kick out of it. So I've got a ton of followers on there. And then that way, when I got a book that comes out, I can quick go, bang, my new book is out. And then I already have all these followers and they check it out.
There you go. Auto complete. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, there you have it, Benny. As we wrap up, this is a great conversation with Kenny Casanova, wrestler, author, comic book, cartoons, man of a million faces, voices, and singing. Apparently, final thoughts to you. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I am a huge fan of busy. Anybody who is busy, but like gainfully busy, and it seems like Kenny has busy like completely mastered in a good way.
The hustle.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. If I can't push anything, I say everybody try to get a passive income. This is my side hustle. Passive income is where you get little bits of money from everywhere instead of a bunch from one source. You know, and since I have lots of books out now, I might only make a couple bucks off each book, but they add up quick. And that's called passive income. So look it up, people. If you need money, try to find ways to make little bits everywhere, and that'll help.
There you go. Great advice and a great final thought.
That rivals Jimmy Dugan. Avoid the clap from League of Their Own.
Hey, clap can be expensive too. So,
oh my god. Well, before we go on another awful turn, this has been great, guys. I appreciate it. Obviously, you like you said, you've got your own sites, you've got social media, books, plenty, video clips out there. I love it. A lot of good stuff. Obviously, like I said, Benny and I have read some of your stuff. Great stories.
Excellent stuff.
Ken Patera. Excuse me, Vader. We talked about Tito. These are stories that really need to be told, and I'm glad they're getting out there. So, Kenny, thank you so much for your time. For the great Kenny Casanova, for the player himself, Benny Scala, thank you again to everyone. This has been a good live chat. As always, we're live here on our friends with Monte and the Pharaoh. Benny and Dan and Benny in the Ring can be heard anywhere podcasts are listened to. So it's been another great show. Thank you again, everyone. You have a great night, and we will see you next time we're in the ring.